wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. Good afternoon and welcome to Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, Chapter Universitas Indonesia, World in a Snap webinar, ASEAN in 2023, New Dawn under Indonesia's Chairmanship. First of all, let us bring our praise to the Almighty God for His blessings and guidance so that we can gather here to attend today's event. My name is Luis Arashel from the Research and Analysis Division of FPCI Chapter UE Board of 2022, and I will be acting as your Master of Ceremony for today's event. Before we start our event, I would like to remind all of the participants here to rename your Zoom display name with the format name_institution, and please keep your microphone off during the event. However, you are expected to turn your camera on in order to respect the speakers. Next, we would like to welcome and express our gratitude towards the Board of Executives, represented by Anggita Andrea Larasati, as the Vice President on Research and Development of FPCI Chapter UE Board of 2022. We would also like to welcome the speakers, moderator, and all participants of FPCI Chapter UE World in Step webinar, ASEAN in 2023, New Dawn under Indonesia's Chairmanship. In today's event, we are very pleased to have Mr. Dr. Dafri Agusali, Mr. Aristio Rizka Darmawan, and Ms. Melinda Martinez as the speaker of today's webinar, who will be delivering many insightful information regarding Indonesia's chairmanship for ASEAN in 2023. We are also very pleased to have Ms. Inara Pangastuti, who will be the moderator for today's webinar. FPCI Chapter UE World in a Snap, or WINS, is an infographic designed by the Research and Analysis Division of FPCI Chapter UE. This infographic contains a brief summary on recent foreign policy and international relations issues, which are posted on our social media page, which you can check on Instagram at FPCI-UE. Due to the success of previous editions of WINS webinar and high interest on foreign policy studies among our audience, FPCI-UE decided to hold a World in a Step webinar, which is open for students, academics, researchers, and the general public who are interested in foreign policy. I will remind the participants here to be actively involved in the discussion as well as to raise questions, because at the end of the session, there will be a nomination for best participant. We encourage you to raise your questions to the speakers because we will be judging the best participant candidate based on the most relevant and interesting question. So please do not hesitate to be active in the discussion. Before we start the main session, let me explain today's rundown. First, we'll be started by opening by the MC, which will be then followed by remarks from the project officer and the vice president of FPCI Chapter UE Board of 2022. Will be then followed by the profile introduction by the moderator, profile introduction of the speakers, which will be then followed by a presentation by Dr. Dafri Agusali, a presentation by Mr. Aristio Rizka Darmawan, a presentation by Ms. Melinda Martinez, which will be then followed by a question and answer session, the concluding remark by the moderator, the photo session, best participants announcement, and at last, closing by the MC. Without further ado, please welcome Celia Vanessa Hakim as the project officer of this event, who will be delivering her opening remarks. So Celia, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Luis, for the time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, and greetings to us all. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope we are all in our best health today. It is a great honor for me to be given the opportunity to hold today's World in a Snap webinar with the theme ASEAN in 2023, New Dawn under Indonesia's Chairmanship. First of all, I would like to welcome and thank all of the participants here today for your eagerness to attend and learn. I would also like to welcome all of our marvelous speakers today, Mr. Aristio Rizka Darmawan, Mr. Dr. Dafri Agusali, and Ms. Melinda Martinez for your willingness to share your knowledge and expertise regarding this topic with all of us today. Not to forget that I would also like to welcome and thank Ms. Inara Pangastuti, who will be our moderator for this event. I would also like to express my most sincere gratitude to the Board of Executives, to the managers and vice managers, as well as colleagues of my most wonderful division, Research and Analysis, and the prodigies of FPCI Chapter UE Board of 2022, as this event would not be as successful without your guidance and utmost support. As a country that hosted the first ASEAN Summit in 1976, Indonesia has taken the role as key driver of the ASEAN community building. With the free and active foreign policy that Indonesia upholds, it influences ASEAN's leadership and agency in Southeast Asian diplomacy. Entering its sixth decade, ASEAN finds itself in a very different globalized world of ever-changing geopolitical dynamics. Not only that, but very recently, Timor-Leste has been recognized as the newest member of ASEAN. Given the circumstances, Indonesia will also be the chairman of ASEAN in 2023. So, what are the opportunities, challenges, and the right strategy to that obstacle? I hope that you can find the answer in today's webinar as we gain some insights from our respected speakers on the topic. That's all from me. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom. Om Santi 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 Om. Namo Buddhaya. Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, Chapter Universitas Indonesia, Board of 2022, Transcending Boundaries. I give my floor back to Luis.
Thank you, Celia, for the opening remarks. Next, we are inviting Anggita Andrea Larasati as the Vice President on Research and Development of FPCI Board of 2022, who will be delivering their opening remarks. For Kak Andrea, the time is yours.
Thank you, Luis. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, greetings to everyone. Welcome to FPCI Chapter E World in a Snap webinar, ASEAN in 2023, New Dawn under Indonesia's chairmanship. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Andrea Larasati as the Vice President on Research and Development of FPCI Chapter E Board of 2022. Firstly, I would like to extend my utmost gratitude to today's speakers and moderator, Mr. Aristio, Mr. David, Ms. Melinda, and Ms. Inara, for your time and willingness to share your knowledge with our participants. I would also like to thank the committee, represented by Celia as the project officer, along with Grisha as the vice project officer, who have worked hard to prepare this webinar today. The 40th and 41st ASEAN Summit is currently taking place in Cambodia. It was only yesterday that Timor-Leste was granted an observer status and will in principle be admitted as the 11th member of ASEAN. This is only one of the changes that ASEAN member countries will see in its development as a regional organization. Next year, Indonesia will hold the chairmanship for the 42nd and 43rd ASEAN Summit. Though new problems might arise, Indonesia's leadership will contribute to determining the future of ASEAN. In today's World in a Snap webinar, we will dive into Indonesia's strategy for navigating possible challenges and its chairmanship while trying to achieve regional agendas. I hope all participants can absorb as much knowledge as possible from our speakers' presentations, as well as actively participate in the questions and answer session. On behalf of FPCI Chapter E, we look forward to seeing fruitful discussion later in the event. That is all from me. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the event. Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, Chapter Universitas Indonesia, Board of 2022, Transcending Boundaries. Back to MC.
Thank you, Andrea, for the opening remarks. Next, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's event. Our discussion today will be moderated by Ms. Inara Pangastu SOS, a teaching assistant at the International Relations Department, Faculty of Social and Political Science, Universitas Indonesia. Ms. Inara herself is an alumni of the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences at Universitas Indonesia, where she received her bachelor's degree in 2022. She was also awarded as the best graduate and earned the highest thesis score in her batch. Her research interests covers foreign policy analysis and ASEAN studies. During her studies, she won first place in ASEAN IKR Peace Message competition in 2021. She also participated as a delegate of Indonesia for Asian Korean Youth Summit in 2019 and 2021. Aside from being a teaching assistant, currently Ms. Inara is a media and advocacy officer at the Embassy of Canada to Indonesia and Timor-Leste. Without further ado, please welcome Ms. Inara Pangastu.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this FPCI Chapter E World in Snap webinar. My name is Inara Pangastuti, and I will be moderating today's webinar with the theme of ASEAN in 2023, New Dawn under Indonesia's chairmanship. It's a very great pleasure to welcome you all to this event, especially after the leaders of ASEAN have just announced some surprising news yesterday. So in today's webinar, we are glad to have three notable speakers who will deliver substantive materials regarding Indonesia's chairmanship next year. Our first speaker in today's discussion will be Mr. Dr. Dafri Agusalim, a lecturer at the International Relations Department, Universitas Gadjah Mada. He has been devoting himself in the field of teaching and research for nearly 30 years at this leading university at Indonesia. Mr. Dafri himself got his bachelor's degree in international relations at Universitas Gadjah Mada, master's degree in political science at the Australian National University, and a doctorate degree in human rights and Indonesia's foreign policy at Universitas Gadjah Mada. Besides being a lecturer, Mr. Dafri is also a researcher at the ASEAN Study Center and an executive director of ASEAN Study Center at Universitas Gadjah Mada. More importantly, Mr. Dafri has also published several publications, and one of them is titled Sustainable Development Goals in Southeast Asia and ASEAN. So without further ado, to Mr. Dafri, the time is yours.
Is that still in mute?
Sorry?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, test.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Clear enough, Mr.
Okay.
Dafri. Thank you.
It's clear now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, I would like to thank you very much for inviting me to join this webinar. And then secondly, I would like to apologize if the positions of me now is not really good, for the participants. I just want to tell you that actually I'm going back to Jakarta, by train now. I'm stopped at the Gambir stations, and try to find like a co-working space. But unfortunately, it's not easy for me. So to get it, and then I stop here, and hopefully then I can join this webinar quite effectively. So let me start by talks about the ASEAN in 2023, challenges and opportunity for Indonesia in ASEAN in maintaining, enhancing solidity, cohesiveness, and solidarity among ASEAN member countries. As we already know, for a long time, ASEAN has been as one of the most successful regional organizations in the world. The number of member and strategic partners continue to grow. The issue addressed covering not only traditional issues, but also new issues such as non-traditional security threats, transnational organized crime, etc., etc. Admittedly, had been successful in many areas, but not in the certain areas. So as the founding countries of ASEAN and also the largest countries among the ASEAN member states, Indonesia has played a very significant role in ASEAN. During the 3 previous chairmanships, Indonesia, together with other member countries, has succeeded in producing various great ideas that have become reference in ASEAN cooperation in various fields. However, the challenges faced by Indonesia and ASEAN to maintain and strengthen solidity, cohesiveness, and solidarity among ASEAN member countries will be much more severe than in the previous time. I would like to say, admittedly or not, ASEAN in a bad state right now. The solidity, cohesiveness, and solidarity among ASEAN member countries are actually undergoing quite serious erosion in recent years. For example, in the case of ASEAN's attitude or policy toward the South China Sea cases, or in the Myanmar issues. So it's become worse when Indonesia became the chair of ASEAN in 2023. The domestic politics situation and condition in Indonesia and other ASEAN member countries, as well as international political environment, will be very different from the previous situation and conditions. In the field of the political security, it can be recognized that the ASEAN has succeeded in reducing conflict between countries so that they would not escalate further but have not been able to resolve them completely. For example, conflict between Malaysia and Indonesia in relation to the territorial claim, Malaysia and Filipina, the conflict still exists there. Although, as I said before, ASEAN is successfully in preventing this kind of conflict to escalate, to the, let's say, open war. In the field of economic and trade, again, there are so many field and sector of economic and trade cooperation among ASEAN member countries. However, some of them, collaboration have not been implemented optimally. So many agreements, joint statements, and MOU, for example, but again, to some extent, some of this kind of normative achievement is still in that kind of status. I mean, they are facing a big problem in implementation of this kind of agreements and also declaration or joint statement, etc., etc. In the field of social and cultural, it is again, recognized or not, still elitist, not yet able to introduce ASEAN to the general public, including the youth, have not been able to create pride and share identity or build what so-called we feelings among the ASEAN member countries or nations. It has not been able to significantly have strengthened cohesiveness and solidarity among ASEAN nations. Even in the field of social and cultural, there is a nuance of competition, rivalries among the ASEAN member countries, especially between Indonesia and Malaysia, for example, and between Malaysia and Thailand, and etc., etc. So the question is, why do symptoms occur? These symptoms occur due to the social, economic, political, and security problem within and between ASEAN countries, and the negative impact of rivalry between major countries as well as leadership in the crisis in ASEAN. Now, let me check to what are the challenges facing by Indonesia and ASEAN in the year to come. There are still political internal security problem for ASEAN member countries, like what happened in, let's say, Myanmar, for example, Malaysia, Thailand, and it can be also called in Indonesia. Yeah. Especially in 2023, as we know, Indonesia will be conducted what's so-called general election, will be a political years that potentially can at least, take a lot of attention, resource, energies of the Indonesian political elites. So instead of dealing with the problem facing by ASEAN, I think in 2023, most energies of Indonesian elite will be focused on the domestic political issues. Almost all ASEAN countries are in conflict, potential to conflict with each other. As I said before, there are still conflict between Indonesia and Malaysia, Malaysia and Singapore, Malaysia and Thailand, Malaysia and Philippines, Thailand and Cambodia, Malaysia and Vietnam, and so on. So that's the problem facing by the ASEAN member countries. The what's so-called the enmity side among the ASEAN member countries is still high, so compared to the amity side. So external pressure due to rivalry between the big countries and regions, like what happened in the South China Sea, for example, or also in relation to the formation of Indo-Pacific and also AUKUS and many other. So the wave of trade of world economic resistance, the pandemic outbreak, the Russo-Ukrainian war, tension in East Asia, like what happened between China and Taiwan, for example, between North Korea and Japan, and also South Korea is one of the um, very what call it, strategic factor that can influence or impact negatively to the effort made by Indonesia and also other ASEAN member countries to strengthen the solidity, cohesiveness, and solidarity among them. And as I said before, one more, please keep in mind, in relation to the Indonesian chairmanships in ASEAN in 2023, we have to also look at the Indonesian domestic politics contemporary. As I said before, is not as solid as the previous era. Remember, in 2023 will be a political year for Indonesia. There will be a general election, which will definitely take up a lot of time, attention, energy, talk, and economic resources domestically in Indonesia. And also, there are still problems with domestic economic, political, social problem of ASEAN member country are still unstable to some extent, is what happened in Indonesia, Myanmar, Philippines, Malaysia, and Thailand, and also political, economic, international security condition that affect regional countries as impact of the, for example, Russia and Ukraine war. And one of the most important thing, once again, it is recognized or not, ASEAN actually now facing what's so-called the leadership crisis, yeah, especially in Thailand, Malaysia, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Philippines, Brunei, Vietnam, and Indonesia. What does it mean by the leadership crisis? I'm just thinking about the ASEAN in the future need what's so-called a strong leader, a leader that not only got a kind of strong support, domestically, but also have a kind of good strong support from international community and trusting, right? But I think it is a big problem in ASEAN now, to have this kind of leader. Let's say what happened in Philippines now, um, we know who is the president of Philippines currently, and also what happened in Malaysia, in Thailand, and of course in Myanmar. So there is a lack of solidity, cohesiveness, and solidarity within ASEAN, especially in dealing with certain strategic issues. For example, in the attitude and views of ASEAN countries on the issue of conflict in South Sea, the existence of the Indo-Pacific, the COVID-19 pandemics, what happens, in the South China Sea, the issues, for example. It's not easy for ASEAN to implement what's called the ASEAN centrality, for example, right? Due to the different position and attitudes of, let's say, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. And the most importantly of all, there is the fact that ASEAN is currently experiencing a serious leadership crisis, as I said before. But it doesn't mean that the ASEAN totally lack of the opportunities, to play important role in maintaining and strengthening the solidity, cohesiveness, and solidarity among ASEAN member countries. First of one, the strategic position of ASEAN, geopolitically, geoeconomically, and geostrategically. ASEAN, as we know, is one of the world's center of gravity, economically, politically, and security. So this is why a lot of many countries in the world, not only in regional countries, but also United States, for example, European countries, Australia, New Zealand is very interested in building a kind of closer relationship and cooperation with ASEAN. And also, second one, the fact that China, US, Japan, India, and Australia have strong interest in ASEAN in its member countries. On the other hand, ASEAN also needs the presence of the countries because the enormous potential various fields, such as economic and trade, politics, and security. As we said, that the fact that Indonesia, for example, uh, is clearly reflects the need of Indonesia for the presence of United States in region. It can be seen by the what happens currently when Indonesia did a kind of strong uh, like cooperation in security sectors by doing a kind of military exercise, Garuda Seal military exercise in Indonesia, and also the Indonesian policy to buy some military equipment from the United States, in the year to come, and many others. And also the capital resources owned by ASEAN are quite strong, both economically, politically, and security. As I said before, economically, ASEAN is one of the biggest markets for many countries in the world, and also one of the growing countries in the world economically. Politically, as I said before, the ASEAN has quite a central position in the geopolitics and also security due to the strategic position of the ASEAN member countries, especially in relation to the rivalities between US and China, South China Sea. And also ASEAN remain solid in several cases or issues. Now, this is the very important one for us. What should be done by Indonesia then? First, maintain stability, external security of each country. This is what should be done, not only by Indonesia, but all member countries of ASEAN. Secondly, maintaining ASEAN international solidity, cohesiveness, and solidarity, especially solution of what happened in Myanmar. So this will become the main concerns of the ASEAN and its member countries, how to solve the problem of the political domestic of Myanmar. And the third one, maintaining ASEAN credibility, being consistent, realizing ASEAN goals in ideal and implementing mechanisms to achieve them. Then what the role that can be played by Indonesia? First, Indonesia can play a role as an agenda setter, a contributor to the strategic idea, especially when Indonesia as a chairman of ASEAN in 2023. And secondly, as a decision maker, so Indonesia can play a strong role in determining the issue or the program, for example, decision in the decision making process. And then the third one, Indonesia also can play as a good executor of ASEAN agreements and programs that has been made. As we know, so for so long, there are so many, as I said before, right? Agreements, MOUs, declaration, joint statements, in every summit of ASEAN. But unfortunately, you know, uh, there seems that problem in implementation of this kind of agreement or joint statement. So it's time for Indonesia to show to the world, not only to the ASEAN, that Indonesia can be a good executor for any agreement that has been made by ASEAN member countries. And the fourth one, Indonesia can also play as a conflict resolver as a negotiator or mediator in the context of ASEAN internal conflict, as well as conflict between ASEAN countries and conflict between ASEAN member countries and region. Indonesia has already shown a kind of successful effort, as a mediator or negotiator. Let's say in the case of conflict between Thailand and Cambodia, about the issues of temples somewhere in the border of between Thailand and Cambodia, for example. Indonesia is successful as a mediator in this kind of cases. And also in the case of conflict in the South Philippines, Indonesia also plays a role. And then hopefully in the future, Indonesia can strengthen, its role in this kind of issues, as a negotiator or mediator. And as a conclusion, then Indonesia and ASEAN still have the opportunity to be able to maintain and strengthen solidity, cohesiveness, and solidarity among fellow ASEAN member countries for the realization of the goals and ideals of establishing ASEAN. However, the challenges faced by Indonesia and ASEAN to achieve this will be far more severe than the challenges faced in the previous time. In this context, it is necessary to have a strong leader, namely a leader who has strong domestic and international political support and trust. We may think some leader like Soeharto, for example, Mahathir, Lee Kuan Yew, although there seems to be criticized a non-democratic leader, but we have to recognize that these three leaders of ASEAN member countries actually a strong leader, yeah, and then the leader must also have a clear vision and serious attention to ASEAN future development. In addition, the leader in question must also have the ability to make an implementation agreements, policies, or program that has been made by ASEAN. And finally, the leader in question must also have qualified skills in diplomacy and conflict management and resolution, either as a negotiator or as a mediator. Indonesia, as a larger and most important country in Asia, has long experience in ASEAN governance, should be able to play a central role in this chairmanship in 2023. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I read it very quickly, due to the limited resource that I have currently. Okay, thank you very much, and back to the moderator. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Duffy, for the very interesting presentation and also the conclusion that touches upon the individual aspect of leader in ASEAN next year. We can discuss about it later for the participants. You can start thinking about your questions right now, but I would like to welcome our second speaker for today, which is Mr. Aristio Rizka Darmawan, a lecturer on international law at the Faculty of Law, Universitas Indonesia, and used to also be my teacher. Mr. Aristio himself is an alumnus of the Faculty of Law at Universitas Indonesia, where he received his bachelor's degree in 2017. He also attended the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University at the United States, and received his master's degree in international law in 2019. Previously, Mr. Aristio was also a consultant for the implementation mechanism of the ASEAN-China South China Sea Code of Conduct at the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. Mr. Aristio has also published a lot of journal articles surrounding the topic of ASEAN. One of them is titled ASEAN Synergy to Overcome Challenges in Maritime Security, Indonesian Perspective as the largest archipelagic state in ASEAN. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Aristio Rizka Darmawan.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Inara, for the very kind introduction. And also thank you very much for the FPCI UI for inviting me to join this very timely and hopefully fruitful discussions. So let me share my screen. All right. So I've been asked to talk about the political security cooperations under the Indonesia chairmanship in ASEAN. So I'm trying to be very brief because, of course, I'm aware that the whole week you've already been listening to a lot of lecture. So the last thing that you want to do in the weekend is hearing another lecture. So I'm going to be very brief. So with hopes that we can have much more discussions later on the Q&A sessions. All right, so my presentation is going to be entitled Managing Expectations, Indonesia ASEAN Chairmanships 2023. Why I choose this title is because that, of course, as we know, there's a lot of expectations now for next year Indonesia ASEAN Chairmanships, right? Because Indonesia is currently at the center or trying to be at the center of the world stage by hosting the G20. If you were aware of the what happens in the last few years, President Jokowi himself tried to sort of like mediate the Ukraine-Russian war. So Indonesia really trying to build a new image in international stage. So there has been a lot of expectations of Indonesia ASEAN chairmanships. However, I think we have to note that how ASEAN work is that we cannot really see something dramatic within each presidency because of how ASEAN works and all the limitations. So that my talk is going to be covering a little bit about what are the strategic issues that ASEAN is currently facing and how can Indonesia tackle some of those of the issues. So I'm going to be covering several issues according to the guidelines that the committee asked me. First, I'm going to be talk a little bit about the ASEAN, Indonesia and ASEAN, the strategic positions of Indonesia within ASEAN, and how it creates a lot of expectations for Indonesia leaderships. And then the second, I'm going to be talking about the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific and issues that is dear to Indonesia, the significance about the outlooks and how we can going forward with the outlooks. And of course, one of the hotspots in Indonesia and in the regions, of course, is the South China Sea, and how can Indonesia chairmanships create a meaningful contributions to maintaining peaceful and security in the South China Sea. And I'm going to be talking just a very brief about the Myanmar issues and how this can going forward. We have a lot of deadlock and no progress after the 5-point of consensus and how can it going forward. And the last is very quick about Timor-Leste, which now being an observer in ASEAN and how we can going forward with the status of Timor-Leste on next year Indonesia ASEAN chairmanships. First, I think the expectations of Indonesia leaderships in ASEAN, or of the expectation of will there be something significant under the Indonesia chairmanship next year, I think it's natural because Indonesia historically has been regarded as the natural leader of ASEAN. We play a lot of significant role in the conflicts in ASEAN histories. For example, during Professor Mukhtar, we host the cocktail for the settlement of dispute and then a lot of things. So there are a lot of expectations under Indonesia chairmanships next year. Indonesia, of course, now economically we are getting better and solid. So we can show political stability as well in the last few years. So with a bit solid, well, of course, I think Pak Dafri mentioned a little bit about how the political turmoil, domestic political might contribute to the leaderships. I think, relatively speaking, I think we are still in the good phase of political domestic situations, which I think we can, of course, contributing more on the international stage. I think that's proven when how we trusted to organize the G20 and now the ASEAN and etc. So Indonesia, I think it's trying to have a new or to create a more significant role in the global community. So there's a lot of expectations in Indonesia in ASEAN. Of course, there has been a lot of initiative that Indonesia contribute, including the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, which I'm going to be talking in the next couple of minutes. So I think these huge expectations, when it comes to reality, it's a bit difficult. I myself happen to be researching a little bit about the issues of Indonesia ASEAN chairmanships, and I've been interviewing several officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I found that it's quite different based on my interview on how Indonesia preparing the ASEAN Chairmanship 2023 with the previous Indonesia ASEAN Chairmanship. Even when I talk to colleagues from CSIS, for example, 10 years ago, Kemlu organized like a lot of meetings, even like a year or 2 years before, on what to offer in the ASEAN chairmanships. But now I think less meetings and I think less big ideas that Indonesia is going to be throwing during the Indonesian ASEAN chairmanships. Even Pak Roy, I don't know, I think this is a Chatham House rule. Pak Roy thought that we won't really throwing something big for these ASEAN chairmanships because of a lot of reasons, because of the G20s now, and with a lot of all of the security issues that it really needs to cover and be oversee, and Indonesia might not offer something that is significant as like the amendment of ASEAN Charter or any other significant thoughts and contributions. So I think I agree with Pak Dafri. I think Indonesia ASEAN chairmanships came in a very difficult times for the global community. We are really in a volatile world. We've seen a lot of conflicts now, the ongoing Ukraine and Russian war, which have a huge significant in terms of economic implications, also to Southeast Asia, to nearly all countries in the world. We've seen how the U.S.-China rivalry is getting more tense. A few weeks ago, we saw that Nancy Pelosi visit to Taiwan, and I think it's really set the new stage on how U.S.-China relationships can be, how China view the U.S. in terms of its security, and also the recent re-elected of Xi Jinping as the leader of the Communist Party. It shows us that the rivalry, I think, in the next few years will still be here, and expectedly, I think it's going to be more sharper and sharper. So it's also, of course, a difficult stage for ASEAN. In the last few years, there has been a lot of discourse on how ASEAN should maintain its centrality amidst this competitions. So how ASEAN really maintain its strategic position, centrality, and how to keep relevance. I think it's one of the biggest challenge for the Indonesia chairmanships. And of course, I think the post-pandemic recovery, the global economic recessions next year, there has been a lot of predictions that 2023 is going to be difficult economically. So how ASEAN can help manage this crisis is, of course, I think it's also become a very huge challenge for Indonesia. And the fourth, I think the Myanmar crisis, of course, it's one of the difficult tasks for Indonesia ASEAN chairmanships in the last few years. How we saw that what has been done by ASEAN, the series of meetings, special meetings, with result of the 5-point consensus, but it seems that the 5-point consensus doesn't really effectively in tackling the Myanmar crisis. So the question is really, what can Indonesia propose in order to put pressure on how the Myanmar junta respect or the 5-point consensus, and how that the Myanmar crisis can be resolved. And of course, at the last, I think the South China Sea dispute, I think it's remained a problems with increasing U.S.-China rivalry, with increasing extra regional powers presence here in the regions. The South China Sea disputes remain a hotspot that we should taking into account. Of course, there's a lot of analysts that predict that, well, there won't be war in the South China Sea. The war is more likely happened in the Taiwan Straits, but that doesn't mean that there's zero possibilities. The possibility of open conflict, from my perspective, is always there. But the challenge is how can we manage the dispute. There's an ongoing negotiation of the South China Sea Code of Conduct, which I'm going to be talking in the next few slides, and how can we expect Indonesia to contribute a kind of a meaningful contributions to the South China Sea is also become one of the main concern and challenge for Indonesia ASEAN chairmanships. So let me first talking a little bit about the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. Why I think that this issues is important, because of course it's Indonesia who take a leadership by introducing the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific back in 2019. So now I think as the chair of ASEAN, of course, Indonesia have more opportunity to set the agenda for what being discussed. And really the big questions is how to operationalize the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. Currently, I think the outlook, there has been a lot of endorsement of the outlook. It shows that the outlook actually it's important, not only for all ASEAN countries, but if you go through all the document, Indo-Pacific document, for example, from the US, from the EU, France, and even Japan, they are endorsing the importance of ASEAN centrality in the Indo-Pacific. So I thought this is a kind of a huge modality for Indonesia to reframe or operationalize the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. I think by introducing the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific back in 2019, and now with all of the a lot of endorsement, I think Indonesia should really think about how to really operationalize the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. Last year, 2021, during the ADMM meetings, Indonesia again introduced another discussions paper on how to create the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific from a defense and security perspective. There has been a lot of criticisms that the current AOIP is too focused on the economic and investment side and not really talk about defense and security perspective, while the challenge of ASEAN is not only from the economic, but also in defense and security perspective. So I think I would agree with what Indonesia had proposed last year during the ADMM meetings, that it is important to also have AOIP from the defense and security perspective. But how the other countries buy this and endorsing, I think it's remain a question. And I think if Indonesia really think that it's important, I think Indonesia should also put on the AOIP from a different defense and security perspective really on the agenda. Another issue is that how to operationalize the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. If you saw the document, the AOIP document is primarily talk about the principles or the guidelines or an outlooks, basically. It's not something that is implementable or like something that people can execute practically. So the questions really, it's how to operationalize the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific with all the potentials of endorsement by extra-regional power. I think it's the next question that's really important to how to make the ASEAN centrality and relevant to all the amidst this geopolitical conditions. One thing I noted to be very interesting is that there's a debate. It's not a debate, but it's an issue on whether or not what ASEAN centrality really means. It's a vague concept. It sounds very nice, but when it comes to questions what really means about the ASEAN centrality, no one's really know about what it was. Ambassador Rizal Sukma, I think, once proposed that it's not important for ASEAN to have centrality. What more important is to have how to keep ASEAN relevant, and I think I would agree with that. That the key is that how we can make ourselves relevant in these competitions. So the existing AOIP is from the area of cooperations and maritime cooperations, connectivity, UN Sustainable Development Goals, and economic and other area of cooperations. It's quite interesting. I think these during the summit, Indonesia again proposed an ASEAN maritime outlook, which I don't think it's a good way, because we do have a lot of outlook, but when it comes to how to operationalize, it's remain a big questions. And how what I thought would be more important is to not really make an outlook. We should go beyond norm setting, but how the outlooks should be implemented. I think that's a remaining questions. I think one of the way which I think Indonesia already delivered or announced, I think how to operationalize the outlook at least is to by hosting the Indo-Pacific Infrastructure and Connectivity Forum in 2023 next year during the Indonesia ASEAN Chairmanships. And Indonesia already invited, I think, the US and other countries. But I think the questions now is how we can integrate, I think, the Indo-Pacific Infrastructure Forum and Connectivity with, for example, BRI, the Chinese BRI, or what the things that the US offer. So from my perspective, I think the Indo-Pacific Infrastructure and Connectivity Forum, which will be held next year, should really be the center or connecting the China, US, Japan, and all of the extra-regional power. So I think it should be like the melting pot, which shows that we have a centrality, or we can set the agenda here. I have 15 more minutes, so let me be very quick. So next, I think the big questions is the ASEAN-China Code of Conduct. There has been a lot of expectations. If you saw the news, every time Xi Jinping meet Jokowi, Retno Marsudi meet Wang Yi, they always say that, oh, the Code of Conduct will be ready 2019. Oh no, the Code of Conduct will be ready 2020. No, it's 2021. I think now 2022, but it's not there yet. So I think it's there. From my perspective, I used to be very optimistic about the code of conduct, but the more I talk with people, the more I become less and less optimist, and then become a pessimist, because I think it's never going to be happen. It's just impossible to have the code of conduct which is going to be agreed by China and ASEAN country. The code of conduct will not be the final solutions of the dispute. It won't be dealing with the substance of the dispute, like the ownership's future, but it aims to create a mutual trust between all parties, and which is necessary to maintain peaceful and security. Some of the important notes, of course, is how to make sure that the code of conduct is comply with the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea, with the general international law. If we should not create a code of conduct which violate international law or UNCLOS, right? From my perspective, we would rather have no code of conduct at all, rather than we agreed upon something that is violate international law. So why I think about the impossibilities of the code of conduct, and why we cannot really expect the code of conduct to be settled under the Indonesia leadership. First is because of the huge gap of interest between Indonesia or ASEAN countries with China, right? Just one of there's a lot of issues about that's being discussed in the code of conduct. But from my perspective, the core fundamental difference is in regards to the geographical conditions. Of course, China wants the code of conduct to be applied in the whole South China Sea, in the whole 9-dash line, while Indonesia and other ASEAN countries really don't want the code of conduct to be applied in the whole 9-dash line. So it's really the basic or the limits interest. And these two diverging interests, I think it's mutually negated. There's no point, for example, for China to agree upon a code of conduct which not consider the 9-dash line, right? So what the point, right? So country will just have a 200 nautical mile maximum claim, and it won't be overlapped with China, right? So it doesn't make sense for China to agree upon a code of conduct which will not encompass the 9-dash line. On the other hand, there's no, from the foreign ministry, Kemlu, I think, there's no way that we can agree upon the 9-dash line to be part of the code of conduct, right? Because once we recognize the code of conduct can be implemented in the 9-dash line, it means that we recognize that the 9-dash line exists, right? So and it means that we are recognizing that we have an overlapping claim with China, so that is impossible. So I think what more important for Indonesia ASEAN chairmanship is not really aims to have the code of conduct, but more important or more possible, I think, on how to make more series of negotiations and conversations or diplomatic measures happen in the South China Sea. So rather than aiming for like, we have to have the code of conduct and we settle for the less. So I think the more important is, I think, the diplomatic measures that should be happen. So I think this is how, like, so it's it's part of Bahasa Indonesia. So it's how the ASEAN chairmanship works, I think. So all of the agenda will going to be discussed during the senior official meetings. So basically the Dirjen ASEAN from all ASEAN countries, they're going to be setting what are the issues they're going to be discussed, which then going to be pushed to the ministerial level, and then finally on the ASEAN Summit. So I think it really depends on this senior official meeting. So I think I would agree with Pak Dafri say that that the opportunities is really to set the agenda and also to execute later on. So I think I already talked about this, about the geographical scope and also the the questions on whether or not the code of conduct is legally binding. Now, I think I think all of you are already aware that yesterday the summit issues a statements on the membership of Timor-Leste. I think a lot of people like, oh, welcome, or we already have the 11th. But if we read, actually, it's not that yet that the Timor-Leste is part of ASEAN, right? So number one is always like in principle to admit Timor-Leste to be the 11th member of ASEAN, right? So in principle, it's not like a grant full membership already, right? We still not see a full membership, but what was out there is that it seems that Timor-Leste is already fully admitted, right? So it's kind of a bit weird. The important points, I think it's in the next 2, 3, and 4, right? So it's not like we grant now, but we should grant the observer status for now to ASEAN, right? It's a one-way closer, but we're not there yet. So, but you know, the challenge now is in number 3, right? To formalize an objective criteria based on the roadmap for Timor-Leste to be full membership. So it's not yet being discussed, right? So ASEAN will discuss. So I think it's a homework during Indonesia ASEAN chairmanships to consider what are the objective criteria, right? So with the fulfillment of the criteria, then Timor-Leste is going to be fully admitted as a member of ASEAN. So I think it's also the key on how ASEAN later on is going to be formulating the criteria, whether or not the criteria is too high. We have to bear in mind now Timor-Leste is one of the poorest country with a very difficult economic situation. So I think we should also bear in mind, right? I think one of the issues of Timor-Leste to being admitted into ASEAN is how that when we have an economic integrations and how it might affect the other countries. Like so, there's a huge gap, for example, between like Singapore and later on Timor-Leste, right? So the criteria, etc. I think it should be also being discussed during the Indonesia ASEAN chairmanships, right? So it's a very interesting path, but I would rather seeing it as a wait and see rather than like, oh, we fully admit it as a member of ASEAN. But of course, I think it's a homework. The low-hanging fruit later on, if Timor-Leste is going to be admitted to ASEAN, is that how we can change the logo, right? Because now the logo is all the member of ASEAN countries. But later on, if we fully admit it, we have to change a little bit of the logo of the ASEAN. So, I haven't finished this slide. So, well, there's going to be a continuations rather than really a groundbreaking change, I think. But I think there's a lot of homework to be done, and I think I think it's time for Indonesia to show its leaderships once again in ASEAN and how to create ASEAN more relevant internationally. So I think I'm going to be stopping there. I'm looking forward to any questions. Thank you very much, by Indra.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Aristio, for the very insightful presentation. We surely can talk a lot about and give a follow-up from what has been discussed by Mr. Aristio later. But now on, I would like to move on and welcome our third but not last speaker for this session, which is Ms. Melinda. All right. Ms. Melinda Martinez is a researcher in the Socio-Cultural Affairs at the ASEAN Studies Center, ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute, Singapore. Ms. Melinda has earned her bachelor's degree of urban studies from Universitas Tarumanegara and also a master's degree on science and urban planning from the Columbia University. Ms. Melinda's research interest revolves around sustainable development, smart city initiatives, digitalizations, institutional framework, and policy for advancing climate emission in ASEAN countries. And she is also the co-editor of the Institute's 2 annual survey reports, the State of Southeast Asia as Southeast Asia Climate Outlook. To Ms. Melinda, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mbak Indara, and I would like to express my gratitude to FPCI Chapter UI for inviting me here. It's always been a pleasure to be with the same panel with Pak Dafri and Mas Aristio, who have elaborately analyze various issues in our region and also propose some excellent proposals for Indonesia chairmanship next year. So when the organizing committee approached me a couple of weeks ago, I was tasked to give like a hypothetical proposal, to really highlight what can Indonesia do in its chairmanship of ASEAN next year. And I would say that there is no statement, no official statement coming from Kemlu yet, and a lot of discussions are still being conducted in track 2, especially on think tank levels like IRIA in Jakarta and CSIS as well. I'm sure Pak Dafri and Mas Aristio have been involved intensively. So I'm going to use a different approach to tell a story about the issues, the geopolitical issues in our region by showing ICE's flagship survey, the State of Southeast Asia. I'm trying to project my screen. Let me try. Okay. I hope you can see it now. Yeah, can you see it? Yeah. Yeah. Is it full screen? No, right? Okay, let me make it full screen. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to use a different approach. I would like to introduce the State of Southeast Asia survey this year as a barometer to understand ASEAN thought leaders' perceptions about regional affairs. And I would like to share key findings of the survey and also highlight Indonesia perceptions of on various regional issues. So hopefully it will highlight what are the priorities of various regional issues, and priorities should be made by ASEAN, learning from the Indonesian elite perspective as itself. And then the third one, I would like to underline the various reflection points for Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship based on that survey. So for those of you who are actively involved in foreign policy, foreign affairs in the region, you may be familiar with the State of Southeast Asia survey. It's a flagship report by the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies here in Singapore that really measures Southeast Asian perceptions about geopolitical affairs, about various economic, also regional issues, and also major power competitions in our region. It really provides, I would say, underline the moods, the attitude of regional policymaker and also elites in the region regarding the region situation. We've been doing it for 4 times already, and this year we will launch the survey invitation soon. So for this year's survey, we launched it in February 2022 to really gauge the views and perceptions of Southeast Asians regarding geopolitical developments affecting the region, and also key regional affairs and how ASEAN has engaged with its dialogue partners. The survey was conducted over a period of 7 weeks, from November to December 2021. And a total of around 1,600 respondents from all 10 Southeast Asian countries took part in the survey. If you see the report and download it, you can see 6 sections in the survey. The first one is background of respondents and regional outlook and developments, also major powers, regional influence and leadership. Also, there is a section dedicated for US-China rivalry and impacts on Southeast Asia. Also, there's a section about perceptions of trust and soft power. So I would like to highlight some of the key findings. regarding regional outlook and developments, last year, as we know that COVID was still lingering in our region. So as you can see here, a lot of Southeast Asians voiced their concern over COVID-19 threat to health and also unemployment.
I'm sorry, Miss Melinda. I think the slides is freezing. We can't really see
Oh, okay.
the data. Yes.
Okay, let me move the slide.
Maybe you can restart
Okay.
screen sharing. Yeah.
Okay. Let me try it again. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, no. I think it's okay not to
Okay.
turn it to full screen because
Okay.
maybe it's easier to personalize as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, regarding Southeast Asian perspective last year, and we have a question: what are the top 3 challenges facing Southeast Asia? And as you know, because COVID-19 was still lingering in the region, so a lot of Southeast Asians still voice their concern over COVID-19 threat to health, and also there is a concern over unemployment and economic recessions, and also climate change and more intense and frequent weather events. Interestingly, we find that the Philippines and Vietnam respondents gave higher weightage to climate change. Indonesia, interestingly, chose, of course, COVID-19 pandemic, and then unemployment and economic recession. And also the third one is very interesting, widening socioeconomic gaps and rising income disparity. So I would like to say that I agree with Prof. Dafri that domestic issue is gaining prominence in our region. A lot of countries really concerned about their domestic political issue, and maybe they don't have any bandwidth to really monitor regional affairs, and it's quite a challenging for ASEAN to move forward now. And the next one is we asked a question also about what are your top 3 concerns about ASEAN. The top concern is ASEAN is slow and ineffective. The third one is ASEAN risk becoming an arena of major power competition. And the third one is ASEAN inability to overcome current pandemic challenges. And Indonesia respondents agree with these top concerns. The next one is we have also a question about do you approve ASEAN response to the Myanmar crisis? As Mas Aristio already elaborated about the 5-1 consensus, that's the way how ASEAN is currently managing the crisis in Myanmar. Interestingly, views regarding this issue is very split in ASEAN. Countries like Myanmar, of course, the Myanmar people themselves really disapprove ASEAN approach because they think that it's quite lacking and it's very extremely slow and it's not effective at all to mediate the disputes in Myanmar. Thailand and Singapore also disagree with this issue. But surprisingly, Brunei and Indonesia, they really approve this issue, probably because last year was Brunei chairmanship, and Indonesia, as we know, that Ibu Retno was very active in doing shuttle diplomacy, right, when the crisis started to happen. So Indonesia, in principle, really approve how ASEAN responds to the Myanmar crisis with the 5-point consensus. And then there is also a question about how to move the Myanmar issue forward. A lot of respondents in our survey want to see ASEAN to be engaged in independent trust-building dialogues. This is top choice among Indonesia respondents. The second choice is ASEAN need to mount a coordinated and unified response with international partners. And the third choice is ASEAN should employ harder methods of suspension to curtail the State Administration Council. That's the general and his administration. Myanmar proposed harder suspension methods, expelling Myanmar from ASEAN. Myanmar Laos is the strongest proponent that ASEAN should not interfere with Myanmar's domestic policies. And next one, we have a section about major powers, regional influence and leadership. As we know that ASEAN is always being caught in the US and China rivalry, we need to understand how ASEAN is leaning regarding to that rivalry. There is a question about which country or regional organization is the most influential economic power in Southeast Asia. Of course, we know that China's dominance in trade, in investment in our region is very, very prominent. China retains the title of most influential economic power in the region, consistent since we did the first survey in 2019. And then the US and ASEAN are the second and the third choice. Highest recognition levels of China's economic influence are more pronounced in Brunei, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Singapore. Meanwhile, Indonesia recognition level of China is lower than ASEAN average. So I think Indonesia still show a modest, a healthy, recognition of China. And then the previous question was about economic influence. Now there is a question about political and strategic influence. Of course, China, a lot of respondents in our survey mentioned China. It remains the most strategic and influential political strategic power, followed by the US and ASEAN. And strongest view come from Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. Again, Indonesia's views of China's political strategic power is lower than ASEAN average. And there is a question about who do you have the strongest confidence in to provide leadership in championing the global free trade agenda? Interestingly, confidence in the United States expanded from around 19% last year to 30% this year, probably because during that time, President Biden was elected. So confidence over the US leadership improved significantly in our region. Meanwhile, quite interesting, China is coming in the second place with 24%, up from 13% last year. Meanwhile, quite interesting also, Indonesia has the strongest confidence in ASEAN, and then the second one, China, and the third one is the United States. And who do you have the strongest confidence in to provide leadership to maintain the rules-based order and uphold international law? Top three choices are the United States, ASEAN, and the EU. US is top choice among respondents from Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. ASEAN, again, is top choice in Indonesia. And meanwhile, China is the top choice in Cambodia. Next section is about ASEAN in the middle. ASEAN is caught in the crossfire as Beijing and Washington compete for influence and leadership in Southeast Asia. How should ASEAN best respond? A lot of respondents in our survey mentioned that ASEAN needs to continue to favor proactive approach of enhancing its resilience, its own resilience from within, and to fend off pressure from the two major powers. This view is very, very strong in Indonesia. And then the second option is not choosing side. And then the third popular option is to seek out third parties to broaden its strategic space and options. And if ASEAN were forced to align itself with one of the two strategic rivals, which should it choose? The US continues to enjoy popular support over China, but the level of support varies differently across ASEAN member states. For instance, in Myanmar, in the Philippines, and Singapore, those respondents really voiced their support for the United States. Meanwhile, in Cambodia, Laos, and Brunei, they chose China. Indonesia's views is moderately split, I would say, because 55% of Indonesia respondents chose the United States and 44% chose China. I would say, Indonesia is quite centrist in regards to this US and China strategic rivalry. And if ASEAN were to seek out third parties to hedge against the uncertainties of the US-China strategic rivalry, who is the most preferred and trusted strategic partner for ASEAN? Frontrunners remain the European Union and Japan. These two are prominent among Indonesia respondents. Share of Japan and India decreased, while share of Australia, UK, and Republic of Korea increased. And the next one is the perceptions of trust. This is a section where our respondents weight their trust on, I think, 5 major powers: China, the United States, Japan, EU, and India. So regarding the US and China, China's low confidence rating decreased, while the US enjoy increased confidence rating in the region, as we can see here. 26% of our overall respondents think that they are confident with China's leadership. Meanwhile, more than half, around 50%, are confident with the US leadership. And regarding Japan and EU, confidence in Japan and EU remain, but confidence level decreased overall. And lastly, India. Low confidence in India remains. As we can see here, only 16% of our overall respondents thinks that India has the ability to do the right thing. Yeah, so based on those, my personal experience involved in administering the survey, what kind of what reflection I can provide for Indonesia's ASEAN Chairmanship in 2023. The first takeaway is Indonesia and responses to global issue. I would say it's quite interesting because the survey was conducted when the impact of COVID-19 was still lingering across the region. Understandably, Indonesia respondents voiced their concern over public health, unemployment, and widening socio-economic gaps. You know, at that time, we only have one C, right? COVID-19. Now we have conflict, another C, the conflict in Ukraine. It is expected that the impacts of Russia's invasion on Ukraine and the US-China decoupling on the regional economy will be much more at first next year. Probably, I would say Indonesia may need to deal with bread and butter issues in the region, such as ensuring continuous supply chain and enhancing food and energy resilience in the region as a response to mitigate the supply chain crisis arising from the Ukraine conflict. Yeah, I think this issue also took center stage in various G20 meetings this year. But nonetheless, there are plenty of initiatives to be explored amid the global economic fallout. For instance, we have to think about the other C, which is climate change, the issue of our sustainability and how to make our economy greener is gaining traction among ASEAN governments. Also, the issue of connectivity, infrastructure connectivity across the ASEAN region. How can we really enhance our regional resilience by improving our own regional capability is going to be very, very important next year. And of course, digital economy is everyone's top priority, I would say, since COVID-19. There are plenty of initiatives proposed by a lot of ASEAN leaders to make our regions integrated regionally. And also strengthening ASEAN relevance. Majority of Indonesia respondents in our survey have high hopes in various ASEAN mechanisms. For instance, we see that Indonesia elites in our survey basically agree with ASEAN response to the Myanmar crisis, and they want to see ASEAN being more proactive in resolving the conflict in Myanmar. It really shows a healthy enthusiasm for strengthening ASEAN relevance. Also, Mas Aristio and Pak Dafri have already mentioned that Indonesia's chairmanship in ASEAN previously had been monumental. For instance, the adoption of Bali Concord in 2003, and then also the shuttle diplomacy to mediate the territorial conflict between Thailand and Cambodia, held by Pak Marty in 2011, were some of the example of Indonesia's leadership style in ASEAN. And President Jokowi recent trip to Russia and Ukraine as a peacemaker, and the G20 leadership have really signaled Indonesia healthy appetite to take ASEAN to the next level. And in regards to responding to major power rivalries between the US and China and strengthening ASEAN centrality, compared to other ASEAN member states' responses, I would say that Indonesia's responses were quite in the middle. A lot of Indonesian elites are not too anxious about China's growing influence, nor too confident as well with the US leadership. So it really indicates that Indonesia's centrist views in navigating this geopolitical rivalry. So it is expected, or there is a healthy enthusiasm that Indonesia may initiate concrete programs that could strengthen ASEAN centrality. Mas Arisio has already highlighted previously that operationalizing the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, and also strengthening various ASEAN-led mechanisms such as the East Asia Summit and also the ASEAN Regional Forum are going to be very important for Indonesia's next year. So I would like to stop there, and I'm happy to discuss it further with you in the Q&A session. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Melinda, for the very insightful presentation, because it's always been very nice to hear someone in this IR field approaching an issue with quantitative methods, since most of IR research we use qualitative methods. So it's very refreshing. So thank you so much, Ms. Melinda. All right, our three speakers have delivered a very substantive and informative presentations regarding the current political issues and how it correlates to Indonesia's chairmanship in 2023. Now, I think we will proceed to the next agenda, which is the question and answer sessions. So to all of the participants who wanted to ask questions to the speakers, please kindly use the raise hand feature and turn on your microphone when I allow you to do so. Or you can also send your questions through the Zoom chat with the format, name, institutions, and preferred speakers, and also your questions. So I think I will start the first batch with 3 questions. Anyone? Not yet. So maybe we need a little reminder before, but from the very beginning, but Jeffrey has talked about many baseline issues that ASEAN is facing. We still have many challenges to be addressed under our 3 pillars of the ASEAN community. And talking about Indonesia's chairmanship next year, we can also talk about how we should pay attention to how the leader is going to bring ASEAN to the next level despite all the challenges. And it's also related to the presentation that Mr. Aristio have given, which told us that we might not give a very groundbreaking innovation and contributions to in our chairmanship next year due to this current unstable global situations. And I think that's very interesting to talk about how we can still keep the ASEAN intact and relevant despite all of this. And most importantly, because we are given an assigned status as natural leader, we have these huge expectations that if we were not to accommodate those expectations, then what will happen? Very interesting to talk about that. Also, because it is confirmed with the quantitative research that the ICS and with Blue Melinda's team have confirmed that many people, majority of the respondents, also want to ASEAN to give more concrete actions and use this momentum, seize this momentum for Indonesia to take ASEAN to the next level. So if anyone wants to give any questions regarding that, we're very welcome.
It's a difficult time to asking questions, Mbak, because udah pada mau malam mingguan kayaknya.
I think so much.
Or maybe not questions, comments.
All right, I think we already have one question from Beliza regarding the acceptance of Timor-Leste. This is also very interesting. So Beliza asked to the three speakers, reflecting the acceptance of Timor-Leste, does this mean that we can also view Papua New Guinea joining as a future possibility? I think we can start discussing about this issue, starting from Pak Dafri, maybe. Or we can't hear your voice, Pak. We're so sorry.
You hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Okay. All right. Can you hear me? That's okay.
Yes. Just okay. It's clear.
All right. So I'm sorry. Would you please to repeat your question, sorry, on me?
Okay. So regarding the acceptance of Timor-Leste as the 11th member of ASEAN, Beliza asked that this mean we can also expect for Papua New Guinea to join as a future possibility.
Yeah, I think that's a good news, for ASEAN. The fact is the Timor-Leste and also Papua New Guinea is a part of the Southeast Asia, so at least geographically. But it can also means that the part of the successful of the ASEAN in embracing the quote in quotes, the external countries, which is for so long, more identified as a part of the South Pacific countries, rather than Southeast Asia. I mean, by successful, let's say, receiving Timor-Leste and Papua might be in the future, Papua New Guinea in the future, it can be really what is the strategic policies, in relation to the effort of the ASEAN to strengthening a position, especially in dealing with the issues related to the Pacific, especially South Pacific. For example, in relation to the issues of the separatism in Papua, right? West Papua, right? I'm quite sure by receiving a country like Timor-Leste and also Papua New Guinea one day, it can be really what they call it, useful, for Indonesia in strengthening its diplomatic effort, in maintaining the domestic politics and stabilities, of Indonesia, yeah, in the future. But the question once again, for ASEAN is not enough just evaluate the successful of ASEAN in terms of the number of the member, right? But once again, I'm thinking that ASEAN in the future try to more focus on the practical actions, rather than put input, dramatic achievement or something. So one of the problem is with the ASEAN, let's say, chairmanship mechanism. That it's only like a limited times, only 1 year, right? It's chairmanship terms. And then the problem, each chair of the ASEAN has their own agenda, which is sometimes not really related to the previous agenda, set up by the ASEAN member countries. So, for example, Cambodia has their own agenda, and then when the chairmanship just to Indonesia, and Indonesia has their own agenda, and sometimes this kind of agenda, what do you call it, lack of interconnected with the previous agenda. So that's the problem, but again, it would be good for Indonesia if under the chairmanship of Indonesia ASEAN, then we can declare the Timor-Leste then to become put in, or in the process to become member of ASEAN in the future. It can be one of the political achievement or diplomatic achievement of Indonesia. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Pak Devri. Mr. Aristio, would you like to give your perspective?
Right. Yeah, just very quick though. I think it indeed there has been like a discussions on that, but I don't think it's going to be possible because of now Papua New Guinea is member of the Pacific Island countries organization. So I don't think one country can be member of two regional organizations. So whether or not, I think there has been a discussions on the possibilities of of Papua New Guinea. But I don't think it won't be really possible because they already member and by secara rasa they are more Melanesia, right? And they are have a close ties with the Pacific countries, and they're member now, full membership. So I don't think it's going to be quite possible for countries to have memberships in two different regional organizations.
All right, Bu Melinda, do you have?
Yeah, I think regarding Papua New Guinea, we should look at a certain provision in the ASEAN Charter that really says that to be admitted to ASEAN, the applicant must be in the Southeast Asian region. So if the debate over where Papua New Guinea is located is still it's still conflicting, then it is highly impossible that it will be admitted. And also learning from the experience of Timor-Leste application to ASEAN, I think it's extremely important for a member of ASEAN to have a strategic contribution to the regional organization. A lot of countries that oppose the Timor-Leste accession to ASEAN think that Timor-Leste is a very small country, doesn't really have a strategic weight for ASEAN and benefits for the regional organization. So yeah, I think as long as Papua New Guinea's first geographical location is still conflicting, and then the second one doesn't have a strategic weight for the regional organization, it's gonna be super, super tough.
Okay. Bu Melinda, I think we need to get back to you again because there's a question from Najwa from Universitas Gajah Mada that is also related to your response. So she asked that why does ASEAN decided to use this momentum to finally accept Timor-Leste as their 11th member, although they already spent 10th year and more maybe to really want to apply to the organizations. And also previously, like a couple of months ago, we also see that Jose Ramos Horta is meeting with President Jokowi and stated that he hopes that under Indonesia's chairmanship, they will be granted as a member. But now it's happening still under the Cambodia's chairmanship. So maybe do you think it's related to how Cambodia also want to seize this moment to like boost the image of their chairmanship?
Yeah, of course, every ASEAN chair wants to have a landmark achievement, right? A monumental, something that can be claimed in the future that they're contributing something meaningful for the regional organization. Yeah, I think Cambodia, probably because they share their economic concern sentiment. They're developing countries. They still need a lot of capital, investment, infrastructure support, market access. And by joining ASEAN, it will definitely give them a lot of benefits. And maybe I would like to comment regarding, I think the previous question, what's that? Sorry, I forgot.
About the Timor-Leste?
Yeah, there is a question about ASEAN, why Timor-Leste suddenly is admit a lot of ASEAN countries want to support Timor-Leste to be admitted, right? I think the main reason is that Timor-Leste is increasingly seen as a strategic fulcrum in the Pacific region, right, Mas Aristio? I think a lot of diplomatic elites think that China's encroachment in the country is getting very, very strong. The palace built in the country for the president is built by the support of China. So a lot of regional policymakers thinks that if we do not bring Timor-Leste to the region and to put them into a more centrist country, not choosing side between geopolitical powers like China, it's going to stabilize our region. So there is a concern that Timor-Leste is going to be, I would say, poros untuk konflik in the future.
All right. Mr. Aristio,
can I add some more comments?
Yeah. Yes, of course, Pak Davi.
I think I agree with the Melinda argument that the each chair of ASEAN tries to have a kind of against historical legacy or something. In that case, for Indonesia, relating to the acceptance of Timor-Leste as a member of ASEAN, I think it's very important from Indonesian side, at least by successful accepting Timor-Leste as a member of ASEAN, it can be a part of diplomatic instrument for Indonesia to eliminate the bad historical legacy of Indonesia relating to the Indonesia relationship with Timor-Leste long ago, right? At least can rehabilitate Indonesian image as interventionist countries, for example, colonials or something, and Indonesia would like to show to the world that, once again, Indonesia can keep a good relationship with the Timor-Leste, which is long ago, become a part of Indonesia. I think that's one of the reasons why Indonesia is so enthusiastic in trying to accepting Timor-Leste as a member of ASEAN. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I can add one more thing. Actually, there is a very interesting fact about Timor-Leste. I think a lot of people still think that it's insignificant because of the population size, the economy, you know, and their capacity as well to maintain global engagements, right? But actually, Timor-Leste sits very high in the global freedom score by I think I forget what's the name of the institution, Freedom House, I think, yeah, global freedom score. Timor-Leste sits very highly, meaning that they're a fully democratic country. Meanwhile, you know, a lot of ASEAN countries, Myanmar, Thailand, those are considered undemocratic. So really, if ASEAN admits Timor-Leste, it can really boost ASEAN, I would say, branding as a more, you know, like open region for democracy, and it's trying their best to really respect freedom, respect human rights.
I see. So yeah, of course, it's very related to the notion of inclusivity, and also for ASEAN not to be such an elitist organizations, and yet to tackle all those notions saying that ASEAN is giving their own perspective towards the definition of regionalism and stuff. Mr. Aristia, would you like to add something?
Yeah, just a very few words. I think why it's now, or why I think Indonesia have the concern to help Timor-Leste get into ASEAN. I think also because of we shared a historic part of our historical background with Timor-Leste, and I think how we want to recover that and how we want to change the perspective on how this country relationship, I think is also very much I think influence on why Indonesia specifically we aim to help Timor-Leste to join ASEAN. I think there has been a lot of events. Sanana Gusmao come to Indonesia, and there's a lot of talk and how it seems that we want to recover all the relationships and also help Timor-Leste to join ASEAN, because I think how it's Timor-Leste in joining ASEAN is very significant for Timor-Leste, and they also have hope that it can also help their economy and etc. So I think the stakes on why now, or why Indonesia have the interest, or so to speak, to help Timor-Leste to get into ASEAN is, I think, partly because of the shared history. Well, the history is not really good, but I think now we want to recover and having a good relationships with Timor-Leste. So I think it's why now and why Indonesia have the interest in helping Timor-Leste to get into ASEAN now.
All right, agree. Okay, so I think we also have Gea who wants to ask the questions directly. Please, Gea, you can turn on your microphone. Or can the committee help to turn on Gea's microphone?
Thank you for the chance. My name is Gea from UI, and I would like to ask to the three speakers about the Indo-Pacific region is currently heating up with the South China issue, China-Taiwan, and etc. But this situation would grow a high possibility of conflict and threats in the region. And how would Indonesia, as chairman of ASEAN next year, face this issue? Thank you so much.
Okay. So maybe Mr. Aristia, you want to start?
Right. Yeah. Very interesting questions. I think, yes, indeed. I think we, as I said in my presentations, now we are in a very volatile world where there's a lot of potentials of open conflict. If we map, I think I've attended meetings a couple of times with Kemlo, and how we see and which conflicts which have more potentials to open conflict. And I think the first one, I think it's Taiwan, and also it's confirmed, I think, and what we have seen in the last few months. With the Pelosi visit to Taiwan, and with the tests of the missile and everything, it's most likely that it shows that the possibilities are there, because really, like the Taiwan issues, it's in a very core interest of China. It's like the off limits of Beijing, and I think it's Beijing will want to, can use like even can initiate war with that, of course. And I think also the statement of President Xi, I think a few weeks ago, like China have to be ready for war, etc., etc. I think it shows that the potential of conflict, it's really there. But other than that, the North Korea, I think it's also a potential conflict, right? They just released like a missile and such, which of course raising concern of its neighboring states, and including Japan and South Korea and also its allies, and of course the South China Sea. It's also a possible conflict. So there are a lot of hotspots here in the Indo-Pacific, and the fact that the U.S.-China rivalry is, I think, one of the trigger that really make it possible of an open conflict war. So the questions, the more important questions now, and what can Indonesia do, or what possibilities that we can do, right? So from my perspective, I think it's quite challenging, of course, but the low-hanging fruit, I should say, that what can we do is that to open forum for conversations, for discussions, for diplomatic measures. I think it's very much important, because really, if there's an open communications, meetings, and etc., it, from my perspective, it like the best way to really avoid a war or any conflict in the region. So I think it is, of course, very difficult in order to like mediating and showing up as the mediator of the global conflict, like what Pak Jokowi did, which I don't think it's really successful, or in some ways in mediating the Ukraine and Russia. But I think that's a good way to open a channel of diplomatic correspondence, communications, especially when we are the chair of ASEAN. We can have more diplomatic channel with a dialogue partner, right? And there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of opportunities for Indonesia to set the agenda and really avoid that kind of escalations. Therefore, even though, as I say, the code of conduct was less likely to be settled, but the process itself, I think it's more important. The communications, the negotiations, trust in diplomacy, I think it's really the key to avoid conflicts. If we don't trust the diplomatic or the diplomacy anymore, the more likely and more chance for us to see the open conflict here in the regions.
Oh, okay. Bu Melinda or Pak Devri, do you want to give any comment regarding this matter?
Yeah, maybe I would like. Oh, Pak Devri.
Okay, Melinda, you can do it.
Yeah, I think a very quick comment about the Indo-Pacific. Yeah, I think one interesting fact is now a lot of parties, including the United States, I think Japan, right, and Australia, and also EU, they have their own outlook on the Indo-Pacific. So Indo-Pacific is gonna be so crowded with a lot of overlapping interests. And recently, I think Korea, during yesterday's summit, they also mentioned that they're going to publish their own outlook on Indo-Pacific. So it's gonna be super crowded and very interesting to analyze, to see the overlapping interests and understanding the potential conflicts coming from that.
Okay, Pak Devri, please.
All right. From my point of view, the existence of the Indo-Pacific Initiative can be portrayed from two sides. As we know that the existence of Indo-Pacific is just like the containment policy during the Cold War era, conducted by the Western countries and the Soviet Union at that time. But in this case, I think the existence of initiative of the Indo-Pacific is a part of the Western countries and policies to contain the influence of the China in the region. Although they, campaigns about the useful of the Indo-Pacific for economic and trade cooperation. So I think that's not one side. The other side can be negative one as well for ASEAN, especially. As we know, the Indo-Pacific, as I said before, is a part of the containment policy of the Western country against China. And then it can then bring up the solidity and cohesiveness of ASEAN, can we say now? All right, there's so different attitudes and views about the existence of Indonesia. Is okay, I think we actively import this kind of initiative. Malaysia, Singapore, but not for some other countries like Cambodia, I think, Myanmar, and also Laos, right? So, in other words, the existence of Indo-Pacific can once again, weakening, yeah, the ASEAN centrality, for example. Now, on the other hand, a country like Indonesia, for example, we are not, what call it, we have to play a very important role in the dynamic of the Indo-Pacific. But once again, the Indo-Pacific, so just one of the initiative made by the Western countries in that case, United States, Australia, and blah, blah, blah. It's not the only one. We remember, before there was what's so-called the Pacific Rim, and then TPP, IPAC, but now most of them, let's say, and effective any longer. And the military alliance as well, before they were ANZUS, but currently ANZUS something like ineffective anymore as the retiring of the New Zealand especially. And then now they propose a kind of new alignment like AUKUS. Now the question is, what is the real objective of this kind of regional organization or something, like the Pacific, AUKUS, and something? It seems to me that it's a part of the once again, balancing policies, made by the quote-unquote Western alliance, which is supported by some of the ASEAN member countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, due to the again, closely foreign policy orientations and ideology and so on, including Indonesia, I think, right? Because some of the countries in region have a kind of two-side interest, on the China. The first one is an economic interest, and then every countries in region, I think, agree that the China is a very important country in relation to the effort of these countries to increase their trade and economic cooperation. But in the political and security aspect, most of the country in regions a bit unsafe. The presence of the China is the great power in region. So this is why, as I said before, the existence of the Indo-Pacific can be provided to kind of two sides of what you call impact to the country in region, including to Indonesia. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for the insights, Padafi. I think we will going to move to talk about the Myanmar issue now, as there's Mr. Farhan Kiswanditanaya from Universitas Pajajaran, who is asking about the Myanmar crisis. Since seeing the never-ending Myanmar crisis and the dynamics on international level within the ASEAN region, do the speakers think that ASEAN Treaty of Amity and Cooperation of Non-Interference Principle still relevant, or does it need some change? because as we know, non-interference principle has contributed to ASEAN inability to make effective decision for this Myanmar crisis. Maybe Bu Melinda, do you want to start responding to this?
Apologies, I'm not following the Myanmar crisis closely,
right.
but regarding the non-interference principle, yeah, I would say that ASEAN frequently is being blamed for its inability to solve its internal conflicts due to that non-interference. Surprisingly, in these issues also encroach into non-traditional security issues, like if you see the haze situation, the transboundary haze, like what happened in 2 years ago when there was a forest fire in Indonesia. Countries like Singapore and Malaysia, they couldn't interfere with that, although they were impacted with that. So yeah, I think a lot of people, a lot of analysts really like to use this shortfall of ASEAN, the non-interference of being the I would say the most difficult issues to in the ASEAN decision making process.
I see. Okay, thank you, Bu Melinda. Pak Dafri, do you want to comment regarding the Myanmar crisis? You haven't.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a very short comment. From my point of view, since the beginning, I think it's time for ASEAN to redefine, once again, to redefine the ASEAN principles, including the principle of non-interference. I think ASEAN now have to make sure in what issues that can be categorized as domestic issues, right? So the ASEAN principles and non-interference, I think, cannot be applied for the issue which is international in nature, or transboundaries and blah, 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 including human rights issues, environmental issues, right? Democracies, and so on. So I think it's time for ASEAN, especially during the Indonesia Chairmanship, to redefine what does it mean by non-interference, for example. What does it mean by solidarity, for example, right? That's my suggestion. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Aristio, do you want to wrap up and maybe also give some comment regarding personal curiosity, because the activists have been calling for Indonesia to engage with the national unity government. What do you think regarding that as alternative solutions for the Myanmar crisis?
Right. So just a little bit about the non-interference principle and the ASEAN principle and ASEAN way. I think we have to bear in mind that the non-interference principle is not a ASEAN principle. It's a principle under international law. It was a principle that was established in 1648, even after the Westphalian, that no country can intervene to other countries' domestic issues. It's also a principle under the UN Charter. So it's not a sole principles, ASEAN principles. But I think I would agree with what Pak Davi said. All right, we should redefine on what considered and what measures can be taken in dealings with the issues. So, for example, I think the question, I would agree that the non-interference principle is still relevant, because it's going to be very dangerous if then we put aside the non-interference principle. For example, like the questions of whether or not we should have a humanitarian interventions, right? Like what happened in the other countries, like in Afghanistan or in the Middle East. I would argue that we should avoid that, because it's a lot of interventions, like humanitarian interventions or such. I don't think it's really can solve the problems. It's more, it makes an issues more like much more difficult for the peoples there. So I would agree that we still should uphold the non-interference principle. what I think we should think of is the measure on how to push the government for on complying to the 5-point consensus or any measures that is being regarded or resulted in ASEAN by, for example, not recognizing or not inviting or yeah, any measure. I'm not observing these issues very closely. But I think from my perspective, the non-interference principle, it's a still principle that we should uphold in the regions to avoid any conditions that is getting worse. But how as the mechanisms, of course, it's really what we should think of. I apologize that I don't have it now, but I think yeah. Yeah, that's all from me.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I think technical issues here. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Aristio, for wrapping up, and also to Bu Melinda and Pak Darvi for engaging in this very fruitful discussions. I'm so happy to moderate this discussion, but due to the time constraints, I think unfortunately we have to end the question and answer sessions. But before we end this wonderful event, allow me to maybe conclude a little bit about the entire discussions that we have today. So if we talk about Indonesia's chairmanship in the ASEAN next year, it is only normal to highlight it with how we have given our assigned status as natural leader in ASEAN. Thus, we have this huge, very, very huge expectations regarding our chairmanship. But since there's an ongoing geopolitical turmoil, global instability and stuff, it's actually time for Indonesia to show that it can really move beyond just what ASEAN have done before, and to make ASEAN intact, make it irrelevant despite all of the challenges. Although, of course, the challenges, as Pak Darvi have said, it will be far, far more harder to tackle than previous times. We need to really improve what has been proposed before, our ASEAN outlook from of the Indo-Pacific, and also regarding the South China Sea issue. It's getting more relevant to think about other solutions other than the code of conduct, since it have become more and more harder to realize under our chairmanship, as Mr. Aristio have mentioned in his presentation. And also to a more scrutinized level, we need to think about accommodating all of the perspective of the insight from the people, from our people, because from what Melinda have also presented, we actually, the people of ASEAN wants ASEAN to be more progressive, more concrete, to take more concrete actions and really boost its regional presence to the very micro level. And individually, we also need a leader who have a very clear vision and strong domestic and international backings, because if we don't have such figure, then maybe we can be trapped in another year of ASEAN's inefficiency in tackling regional issues like the time before. So with that, I would like to give my greatest gratitude again to Mr. Darvi Agusalian, to Mr. Aristio Rizka Darmawan, and also Ms. Melinda Martinez for the very, very insightful presentations and also discussions. Before we end this event, I would like to remind all of the speakers and also the participants to keep staying on the Zoom meetings, as there will be some important and also interesting information conveyed by the Master of Ceremony later on. With this, I, Inara Pasuti, resign as the moderator, and I want to apologize if there's so many mistakes or I've made. And I return the floor back to the MC. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Inara Pakastuti, for moderating this amazing and insightful discussion. We hope all participants here have gotten many fruitful insights and gained more knowledge regarding Indonesia's responsibility as ASEAN's next chairmanship. We'd like to remind you that today you should fill the attendance form through the link that has been shared by the committee in the Zoom chat below to claim the certificate of recognition for all of the participants. Before we reach the most exciting part of the event, which is the best participant announcement, we will have a quick photo session, which will be documented by the documentation staff. So for all of the speakers and participants, please turn your camera on so that you can capture your smile here today for today's wonderful event.
Hi everyone, my name is Yusra, and today I'll be in charge of the documentation for this event. So if everyone can turn on their best smile, and can everyone turn on the camera and show their best smile? While we do this photo session, please do not send anything in the chat. So I will take the photos for the first slide in 3, 2, 1. Right, there's a chat. Moving on to the second slide in 3, 2, 1. Moving on to the third slide in 3, 2, 1. Moving on to the fourth slide in 3, 2, 1. And moving on to the last slide in 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much, Yusra, for documenting the event. Next, as I've mentioned before, we will announce the best participant of FPCI Tutorial World in the SNAP webinar, ASEAN in 2023, New Dawn under Indonesia's chairmanship. All right, so the best participant goes to... Congratulations, Najwa Hakim, for being the best participant in this event. Congratulations. And okay, so we have a second best participant. For the second best participant of FPCI Chapter World in the SNAP webinar, ASEAN in 2023 New Dawn under Indonesia's Chairmanship Award goes to... Congratulations, Muhammad Farhan Kriswan Vidya Tanaya, for the best participant in this event. Thank you so much, Najwa and Farhan, for the great questions and for being actively involved in today's discussion. Najwa and Farhan's questions were regarding Timor-Leste's membership and ASEAN PAC of non-interference principle. The best participants will be contacted by the committee for the handover of the certificate. Okay, panels, ladies and gentlemen, this final session marks the end of today's webinar. A big token of gratitude goes to all of the speakers, Mr. Dr. Dafri Agus Salim MA, Mr. Aristio Rizka Darmawan, and Ms. Melinda Martinus, as well as the moderator, Ms. Inara Pangasuti, and all the participants here who have joined me here today for the webinar. Please don't forget to follow our social media, our Instagram at FPCIUE, our Spotify and YouTube FPCI UE, and our website fpciue.com, so that you won't miss our works and publications. We sincerely await you in our future events. My name is Luis Arashel, signing off as the Master of Ceremony. Please accept my sincerest apologies if I make any mistakes during the event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Santi Santi Om, Namo Buddhaya, Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, Chapter Universitas Indonesia, World of 2022, Transcending Boundaries.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you, Pak Dafri.
Thank you, Pak Dafri.
Thank you, Arya.
Thank you, Bang Tio, and thank you, Bu Melin.
Thank
you.
Thank you, bye-bye.
See you, Mas. Pak.
A special regard for Melinda and Aristio. I really, would like to extend my great appreciation for young intellectual like Mr. Share your knowledge.
Thank you,
Aristia
Pak.
and Melinda.
Thank you, Pak.
Thank you.
I learned a lot from you and Mbak Melinda. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
semua ya. Udah tinggal kita di sini. Oke, boleh tolong di stop share? Oke, mantap. Udah boleh, udah boleh. Udah bisa unmute ya?
Yeah, congrats guys.
Guys. Gue OTW perpusat bener ya.
Oke.
Gue dari tadi masih ketawa.
Ayo. Nggak boleh. Nggak boleh. Nggak boleh balik. Iya. Nggak boleh. Berdiri dulu.
Iya ya sih. Kak, sebenarnya aku sudah selesai. Saya barusan keluar dari Zoom. Saya mau masuk, gak bisa lagi.
Demi Allah, menurut gue, partisipan Wednesday webinar ini paling badut se-webinar yang pernah gue hadiri.
Iya, paling chaos. Hektik.
Oke, yaudah. Nih.
Guys, kita evalnya 5. Kita evalnya 15 menit lagi ya. 15.30. Oh, datangnya dari mana? Iya tuh Kak Aif udah setuju lah 15.30. Oke, silahkan tidur, tapi cuma boleh 15 menit.